Hi, my name is Gary Schnell, and I would like to again welcome you into my home near Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I am doing a series of YouTube videos in an effort to highlight and explore different areas of my recently published book, Consciousness, All in One and One in All. Today's exploration will deal with Chapter 8 of the book. It is the chapter around which everything else revolves. It's like the center of the universe. Everything that I've talked before hand leads up to this chapter, and everything I talk afterwards will be looking back at this chapter. There are going to be three parts to this. The first is going to be what I refer to as type F monism, what David Chalmers refers to as type F monism. Not me so much. I'm just borrowing from him. The second exploration or area of exploration will be the physicalist's way of understanding consciousness. And the third part will be to take on some of the critiques of type F monism that will help us to, I think, understand it further, more fully. The title of this chapter is The Intimate Dance of the Acausal Cause. And I'm particularly pleased with that title because what I'm trying to express here, and this is the punchline. So if you don't understand much of what I'm saying in the rest of this talk, please understand that I'm trying to express the idea that consciousness and information are intimately entangled, entwined, so much so that really they cannot be separate from each other. And it's like the best I can do from a way of describing it is an old song by Crosby, Stills and Nash, written by David Crosby, as I remember. That's called Delta, D-E-L-T-A. It's a beautiful song. Crosby did write some beautiful songs, beautiful music. So to this point, in a way of understanding matter and life, there was a separation of mind and matter, as if they were distinct. And there would then be a couple of ways of looking at that dualistic way of understanding things. One would be that consciousness is a result of bits of matter, and somehow consciousness impacts on those bits of matter from the standpoint of making a decision, or somehow the bits of matter are a function of consciousness. But our consciousness and the bits of matter necessarily separate, or are they one? And that's where we're going to talk about the idea of type F monism. Now, Chalmers, from just to briefly discuss some of the critiques of the physicalists' approach to things, as a way of understanding the nature of consciousness, suggested three critiques leading into his hard question of the nature of consciousness. The critiques have to do with the first one has to do with the idea that bits of matter, bits of material, can give us no more than form or structure. That's what bits of matter do. There is no consciousness or experience in bits of matter. The second argument he offered had to do with the zombie argument, if you will, whereby zombies are every bit like people, but they can't understand what it is to be a person. They don't have the mind for that. And the third argument harkens back to the idea of what it is to be a bat, explored earlier, in that we can know everything there is about a bat. If there is some way of knowing everything there is, obviously there isn't. But even if we had all of that knowledge, we wouldn't know what it is to be a bat. And this leads into the idea of a monastic approach. Now, William James, at the turn of the 20th century, began looking into ways that there might be a way of explaining everything from a monastic or singular approach. And this was later taken up by a couple of philosophers, Alfred North Whitehead and Bertrand Russell. And they suggested that these bits of matter, they might get their significance or their life, their significance in the patterns, in how they were arranged, and suggestive of interrelationships between the bits of matter. Some of those interrelationships might be mental or mind, and some of them might be physical. Now, it's from that perspective that the relationships between the bits of matter become realized as an experience. There is no intrinsic nature in lifeless bits of matter that helps us with understanding life or consciousness or experience. And I wish to remind you of the paradigm shift we explored previously of the difference between syntax and semantics, and the difference between software and a hard drive. The hard drive, for example, is the backbone of the software, but it is not what gives the software meaning or depth. So I'm suggesting that quantum physics is about relationships among and between the experience of these lifeless bits of matter that makes experience primary or causal, dynamic. There is a certain limit to the information that lifeless bits of matter have. There's a limitation to the noise that the rules that govern lifeless bits of matter can allow for, and thus a lack of power to help us understand the idea of life and consciousness, which require more noise, if you will, more variety for consciousness and life to be. The rules of physics, the lifeless bits of matter, just don't carry the punch. The reactions, the interrelationships between the two are too predictable. There needs to be more. Alfred North Whitehead looked at these interrelationships of bits of matter as what he referred to as events. And events felt the causes from the past. They imagined the potentials for the future, and they made decisions and choices and the intentions to attend in the moment. And this is all consistent with the informational feedback that I talked about earlier, whereby there's an intimate interrelationship from a bottom-up standpoint as we take in our environment, and from a top-down standpoint as we decide what to take in such a way that you cannot separate out any of the reactions that lead to a choice from the smallest reaction in any given cell. At some point, I may appreciate that there's a sound that enters my consciousness like a siren that might not otherwise enter it when I'm reading a book, or that there's an odor like the smell of fire that might enter my consciousness that might not otherwise enter it. But all the while I'm taking in all of that information while reading that book and deciding moment by moment whether I can continue to read that book. Thus the unknown intrinsic properties of the bits of matter are phenomenal, conscious. They are experiential. And again, the consciousness would be causal. It would be primary. And it might be primary with something else. And I'm suggesting here that it's primary with information, which I'm about to discuss further. The phenomenal and the physical, they are connected, but they're not intimately connected like I am suggesting that information and consciousness are. I am suggesting that the physical emerges from the phenomenal, or the combination of phenomenal and information, which would be called protophenomenal, or that it comes first. Consciousness isn't alone by itself, which would make it phenomenal as a phenomenal cause. It exists with something else, information, that would make it a protophenomenal cause, such that everything else, the bits of matter, are derived, the laws of physics are derived from this protophenomenal consciousness and information. Now, Bertrand Russell, earlier referred to, had the idea of the existence of information spaces to help us understand the relationship between the physical and the experience. With the information space grounded in the ProtoPhenomenal, Chalmers went on to suggest that information spaces are abstract. They're not confined to the physical world in which we live. They are not defined by our spatial, temporal way of understanding things, and they can exist along a continuum that is consistent with the amount of information that is a part of that physical expression of the information. There can be combinations of pieces of information, like brown and horse or red and ball, and there can be relationships between the information, like different types of mammals, dogs, horses, bats, or different colors, red, blue, yellow, and then there can be the addition of these pieces of information in increasing complexity that allows us to appreciate the various presentations of the information that we have available to us. So the information space doesn't define the physical, it doesn't define the phenomenal, but it exists in both. In the physical realm, the information of the physical realm is causal, like a light switch being off or on, or like the neural patterns of the brain, whereas information in the phenomenal realm is acausal. Patterns of the patterns of information depend on the intrinsic phenomenal qualities of the experience versus the neural patterns that are the physical manifestation of those experiences. So what I'm trying to express here is that if I'm looking at a red ball, there's not a red ball in my brain. There is a neural pattern, and that neural pattern somehow helps me to have the idea and the experience of a red ball if I bounce it or throw it. But the red ball is not in my brain, nor can I appreciate the neural patterns that are allowing me to have the experience. I'm unaware of the different dendritic connections to the axons of other cells and the different depolarizations that are going on that allow me to appreciate a red ball or a brown horse or anything. I can't appreciate the object itself is not in my brain, and the neural patterns that allow for my awareness or experience, not awareness, my experience of that object, they are, they're not in my brain. I mean, I can't experience, they are in my brain, but I can't experience, I'm unaware of them, I cannot experience them. So information is a part of both the physical, and it's causal, and the phenomenal, where it's acausal. It doesn't define the physical or the phenomenal. It is a part, maybe a way of looking at it, a link between the two, which has some significance. These information spaces, as I said, they're not amenable to a spatial temporal understanding. Now, the physical neural patterns, they're consistent with an experiential state, but they are not the experiential state. They are depolarizations of different cells in my brain. Our experience is informed by past events and physical potentials. Information cannot observe itself. It cannot collapse itself. It requires consciousness for that to happen. While consciousness, on the other hand, really has no meaning without information. So that's where I'm getting into the idea that consciousness and information need each other. And they are intimately entwined. And apart from space-time, information is existent as waves, and within space-time it is existent as bits of matter, as particles. And it is our experience of those bits of waves that gives bits of particles that gives them meaning. And it is my effort to help address the idea that our consciousness is connected to the broader consciousness, the big C consciousness that is existent apart from our universe, along with those informational waves, for those informational waves to have meaning, for those informational waves to be grounded. And our consciousness is an approximation of that. And our space-time universe is an approximation of the consciousness and information that are in and through our universe and experienced or understood as the zero-point field, or I've referred to it as nonlocal space, or the Akashic field. There are other names for it as well. David Bohm, I can't remember his name for it. But now that I've lost you with my rambling, I want to bring you back to the idea, the main idea of all of this, that there is an intimate dance between information and consciousness. They are inseparable. And we will be moving on from here to discuss the physicalists' way of understanding consciousness, and then to discuss the criticisms of the type F monism of the intimate dance. In the meantime, I want to thank you for your attention, your intention to attend, your choice, your experience of this, I hope, has been pleasant. I might have been a little confusing near the end. Please forgive me. In the meantime, though, be well and be at peace.